Today's video is sponsored by the #1 language learning app in the world, Babbel. I'll be honest with you, when I found out that Babbel wanted to sponsor this channel, I was a bit hesitant. I like to only promote products that I use, and I didn't think I'd be able to learn a new language. I had taken French throughout elementary school and high school, and today I can't string together a simple sentence. My French language skills are similar to Joey Tribbiani's on Friends, but I decided to give Babbel a try by learning Dutch. It's been an amazing and extremely rewarding experience. Babbel starts off with easy lessons so it's not overwhelming and they gradually get more difficult. They also have amazing podcasts and games that make learning a new language fun. Babbel focuses on teaching you language for everyday life. It's to the point where I feel confident enough that I can go to the Netherlands because I know how to say "waar is dat toilet?" And perhaps more importantly I know how to say "Nadankia, ik wil de soest herring net eten." Right now, Babbel has a great offer for criminally listed viewers. Click on the link in the description box and you'll be able to buy 6 months and get 6 months free. Start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks with Babbel. Once again, for that special deal of buy 6 months, get 6 months free, just click on the link below this video. Number 3. Louis Lassois. In 1922, 21-year-old Albert van der Vos married 17-year-old Jean Lassois in Antwerp, Belgium. Sometime after they got married, Jean gave birth to his set of twins. After the twins were born, Albert went back to the woman that the newspaper said he found amusing before his marriage. Jean was obviously upset by this. That's when Albert came up with what he thought was a brilliant plan. Albert had an identical twin brother, so he had his brother pretend to be him, and he moved in with Jean. Amazingly, this scheme worked for a while. But then Jean figured out she was living with Albert's twin brother. So she took her twins and moved back in with her parents. Tragically, after she did, one of the twins died. Albert was furious and he blamed the death on his parents-in-law. He then asked for Jean to come back to him. But after everything that happened, Jean was really not interested in mending her relationship with Albert. So in 1925, Jean asked for a divorce. Albert did not take this well, so he shot 20-year-old Jean 5 times. She died as a result of her wounds. As Jean's father, Louis Lassois, stood over his daughter's dead body, he vowed to get revenge. Albert was arrested and he went to trial for the murder. Louis Lassois attended the trial, and each day he brought 2 guns and a dagger because he planned on killing the man who murdered his daughter. But he did not get the opportunity. Albert ended up being sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. There was an appeal, and Albert only ended up serving 7 years. When he was released, he moved to Paris, France. It wasn't long before Albert became engaged to a rich widow. They planned on getting married in June 1933. Jean's father, Louis Lassois, traveled to Paris to look for his former son-in-law. On his 6th trip in April 1933, he learned that Albert was living in a hotel room. He waited near the entrance of the hotel for 2 days. Then he saw 32-year-old Albert van der Vos step out onto the street. Louis shot him 4 times, and Albert fell down on the street. Louis walked up and put a 5th bullet into his daughter's killer. He then went to the closest police station and turned himself in. Louis went to trial in December 1934. The judge pointed out that Albert had already been convicted and served his sentence for murdering Louis's daughter. Louis said that the only way Albert could atone for what he did was by paying with his life. He also said, "He fired 5 shots at my daughter, and he has now received 5 from me, justice is done. Even though Louis Lesoir admitted in court to murdering Albert van der Vos, he was acquitted of all charges. Number 2. Jay Maynor. When Julia Maynor's mother was a baby, she was adopted by a man named Raymond Earl Brooks. They lived in Cullman, Alabama. Julia isn't exactly sure when, but when she was really young, Brooks started sexually abusing her. It most likely started in the mid-1990s when she was around the age of 4. The abuse carried on for years. She said, "I don't remember when it started happening, but I know it was for a very long time. It was long enough for me to think it was completely normal. It made me to feel that he actually loves me in a different kind of way than my mother and father loves me." When Julia was 8, it came to light that Brooks had been molesting her. Brooks was arrested. In late 2002, Raymond Earl Brooks pleaded guilty to charges regarding the sexual abuse. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he was released early in February 2005. He had only served about 27 months in prison. Julia grew up, and eventually she had 3 children of her own, but she had never gotten over the years of sexual abuse. She said she suffered daily from it, and she had post-traumatic stress disorder. Julia did not think that it was fair that she had to suffer every day of her life, and Brooks only had to serve 2 years and 3 months in prison. On June 8, 2014, Julia, who was now about 22 years old, said something to her father, 41-year-old Jay Maynor, about Brooks. Julia had not seen Brooks in at least 12 years. Julia didn't even remember exactly what she said to her father about Brooks, but it stirred something in his mind. Apparently, what Brooks did to Julia had been festering in Jay's mind ever since he found out about it. He hated that the man stole his daughter's innocence. Jay did not think it was fair that he had abused her for about 4 years and had only served 2 years and 3 months in prison. So that day, Jay got on his motorcycle and he hit the highway. He knew that 59-year-old Raymond Earl Brooks lived with his parents in Berlin, Alabama. Along the way, he stopped at the Berlin Plaza Quick Stop, which has a barbecue restaurant inside of it called Mad Dog Mike's BBQ. Jay also had a stepdaughter, and at the Quick Stop, he saw his stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend. Jay thought that the man was abusive to his stepdaughter, so he pulled out his gun and fired at the young man. He missed, and the bullet went through a window and into the Quick Stop. The young man ran into the Quick Stop and hid. Jay calmly walked into the Quick Stop and demanded to know where the young man was. Mike Hayes, the owner of the barbecue restaurant, was also armed, and he told Jay to leave without causing any more trouble. Jay left the Quick Stop and got back onto his motorcycle. He drove to Berlin and went to the home where his daughter's former abuser lived. He found 59-year-old Raymond Earl Brooks outside of his parents' home. Jay shot Brooks once and he died nearly instantly. Jay got back onto his motorcycle and drove out onto the highway. A police officer pulled him over not long afterward and he was arrested. After Jay Maynor's arrest made the news, many people in his community supported him. They thought if they were in the same position, they would have done the same thing. Many people thought he was a hero. A Facebook page was started, and thousands of people joined to show their support. Also, several fundraisers were held for Jay's legal fees. Other people did not think that Jay did the right thing. This includes Mike Hayes, the man who owns Mad Dog Mike's BBQ. He called Jay a psychopathic lunatic. He pointed out that there were 5 or 6 people inside the quick stop when Jay fired into it. Mike wanted to know, would Jay still be considered a hero if he accidentally killed an innocent person? Nearly 2.5 years after the shooting, in November 2016, 43-year-old Jay Maynard pleaded guilty to murder for killing Raymond Earl Brooks. He also pleaded guilty to attempted murder for shooting at his stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend. For the murder conviction, he was sentenced to 40 years of prison. He was given an additional 20-year sentence for the attempted murder. Both sentences are to run concurrently. Jay said he pleaded guilty so that the details of his daughter's abuse would not come out at trial. Jay's daughter, Julia, was thankful for this. She told AL.com, basically he took it so that I didn't have to relive the molestation and also be on the stand in front of a bunch of people talking about and bringing back memories of the molestation. My father was protecting me like a father should do. He is an amazing father, actually, the best. He loves us so much. Jay Maynard is currently serving his sentence at the Bibb County Correctional Facility in Brent, Alabama. He'll be able to apply for parole in May 2029 when he'll be 57 years old. There is a petition to have the governor pardon Jay. Jay still has a lot of support. However, other people think he should serve his sentence. They also find the support for Jay to be troublesome. Pat Morrison, a journalist with the Los Angeles Times, wrote, "It's an unsettling cheering section for someone who allegedly meted out a private punishment against a sex offender who had pleaded guilty and served prison time. And when an Alabama father or a California mother usurps that role, they are not heroes because vengeance is not justice. Injustice, not someone's child, becomes a victim too." Jay was ultimately trying to get revenge for what happened to his daughter Julia, so what does she feel about the situation? In 2016, after her father was sentenced, she said, "I'm going through hell. Everything comes back to me as to why this has happened. I feel like it's my fault. I'm sad, but yet mad." Number 1. Andre Bamberski. In the summer of 1982, 44-year-old Andre Bamberski lived in a small village outside of Toulouse, France. He was a successful accountant. He had divorced his wife, Danielle, about 7 years earlier, and he had just started a new relationship. On the morning of July 10, 1982, Andre's world was shattered by a phone call from his ex-wife. Their 14-year-old daughter, Kalinka Bamberski, had been found dead in her bed that morning by her stepfather, Dieter Kombrach. When Danielle called, the cause of death was unknown, but there were no signs of homicide, and it looked like the death was natural. Andre simply couldn't understand how his daughter could have died in her sleep. Kalinka was attending a French boarding school, and she spent the summers with her mother in Krombach in Lindau, Germany. Krombach was a respected doctor. Kalinka was a happy girl, so Andre highly doubted that she died by suicide. She was also healthy, and she skied, skated, and windsurfed. Andre knew that it was incredibly rare for an athletic and healthy teenager just to die in their sleep. Andre anxiously awaited the results of the autopsy report. The autopsy was performed 2 days after Kalinka was found dead, and Andre received the report 3 months later. What Andre thought was odd was that Krombach was in the room for the autopsy, and he is quoted several times in the report. This was completely against protocol. The 2 medical examiners noted that some fresh blood was found around the vagina and the labia had been torn. but they thought it most likely happened post-mortem. Inside the vagina was a white substance, which was never tested. The medical examiners found puncture wounds on her arms, right leg, and thorax. Krombach said that the night before Kalinka died, he had given her a shot of iron cobalt. He said it was to help her tan. For some unknown reason, a toxicology test on the blood was not performed. Also, Kalinka's genitals were removed, presumably so that they could be examined later. The report said that no cause of death could be determined. The report said that forensic tests on tissue and blood samples needed to be performed. Andrei Bambersky was devastated by the loss of his daughter, and initially, he wasn't suspicious that anything sinister had happened. But after reading the autopsy report, he began to wonder if Krombach had anything to do with her death. Why else would he have been at the autopsy other than to try to cover up what he did? Andrei wanted to know the results of the forensic testing on the blood and tissue samples. Andrei called his ex-wife, and she told him that the tests had not been performed. This only made Andrei more suspicious, so he asked the German authorities to look into his daughter's death. They finally did in early 1983. On the last day of Kalinka's life, she went windsurfing. She came home at about 5 p.m. and said she wasn't feeling well. The family ate at about 7:30, and then Kalinka went to bed early. But before she went to bed, Krombach said that he gave her an injection of iron cobalt. He had a news story as to why he gave her the shot. Instead of helping her with her tanning, he said it was to help her with her anemia. Krombach said that Kalinka got up at about 10 p.m. to get a glass of water. Then he said later that night she was still awake and reading in her bedroom. She asked him to turn off her lights. Krombach said that when he found her the next morning, rigor mortis had already set in. He said he injected her with the drugs Coramin, Novafil, and Isotopin in the hopes of reviving her, but it didn't work. A forensic expert condemned Krombach's use of the drugs to revive her and the iron cobalt. Krombach was a doctor, and he saw that Kalinka's body was in rigor mortis. Therefore, she had probably been dead for hours, so it was far too late to inject her with something to save her. The expert thought that Krombach injected her with these drugs while she was still alive. She was possibly even dying or had just died when she was injected. This would suggest that Krombach had something to do with Kalinka's death. Since Krombach claimed he found Kalinka dead that morning, hours after she died, he possibly claimed he injected her with those drugs to cover his bases in case testing was done on the blood. As for the iron cobalt, it would have not helped with tanning, and it should only be used in rare cases to treat anemia. It's dangerous to inject someone with iron cobalt after they have just eaten, which Krombach claimed he did with Kalinka. It's dangerous because it can lead to symptoms like fever, nausea, and vomiting. In the most extreme cases, it can lead to cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. The forensic expert concluded that the injection of iron cobalt caused Kalinka to vomit in her sleep, and she asphyxiated to death. Andrei then became convinced that Krombach had injected his daughter with iron cobalt and raped her. He either intentionally killed her afterward to make sure she would never tell anyone, or he accidentally killed her by giving her the iron cobalt, which caused her to choke on her own vomit. Andrei thought that either way, Krombach was responsible for his daughter's death. Despite the findings, the German authorities refused to press charges. Just over a year later, Andrei went to Lindau, where Krombach lived and practiced medicine, and handed out pamphlets that accused Krombach of murder. The pamphlets also accused the police and the German government of covering up the murder. Andre was arrested and charged with defaming Krombach. Andre bonded out and he returned to France. He was tried in absentia and found guilty. He was given a huge fine, but he could avoid paying it by staying out of Germany until the statute of limitations ran out in 5 years. Andre pressed the French government to conduct their own investigation. They launched one in 1985. They exhumed Kalinka's body and found nothing to aid in their investigation. They asked for her genitals, but they apparently have been lost and they have never been found. This made it impossible to determine if Kalinka had been raped. In 1988, the German authorities handed the tissue and blood samples over to the French authorities. Based on food particles in the respiratory tract, the experts concluded that Kalinka had asphyxiated to death. 5 years later, in April 1993, in France, Dieter Krombach was charged with voluntary homicide. It had been nearly 11 years since Kalinka died. If Krombach was convicted, he was looking at a sentence of up to 30 years of prison. The French government requested that the German authorities arrest Krombach and hand him over. The German government refused. So Krombach was tried in absentia in March 1995, and he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. This really had no effect on Krombach's life. He continued to practice medicine and he remained one of the social elite in his city. The German government was never going to extradite him, and they considered the trial in absentia to be illegal. As long as Krombach didn't step foot on French soil, he'd never have to serve time in a French prison. In January 1997, Dieter Krombach was arrested. He had drugged a 16-year-old patient and raped her. The girl woke up during the rape, but she was paralyzed because of the drugs. She told her parents about the rape, and her parents went to the police. In August 1997, Krombach was convicted of rape, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. His medical license was also revoked. But since Krombach had a good reputation in Germany, his sentence was suspended, so he didn't have to spend a day in prison. After Krombach was arrested, 6 women came forward and said that they had also been raped by Krombach. They hadn't come forward sooner because they didn't think that anyone would believe them. Or they weren't exactly sure that the rape had happened because of the drugs that Krombach had given them. After Krombach was sentenced, he sat down for an interview with a journalist, and he said he didn't rape the 16-year-old girl. He claimed that she wanted to have sex with him. Also in the interview, he called Andre Bambersky crazy. In 1999, Krombach left Lindau and moved around frequently. Andre hired a private detective to keep tabs on the man he believed killed his daughter. It turned out that despite having his medical license revoked, he continued to work as a substitute doctor. He was eventually arrested for fraud and practicing medicine without a license. After he was arrested, he was examined by 2 psychiatrists. They said that he was a narcissist who believed he was beyond the law. They also said he was a compulsive sexual predator who would sexually assault any patient or staff member if left unsupervised. Krombach even admitted to the psychiatrist that he had drugged and raped several women, including a 16-year-old girl. Krombach was convicted of fraud and practicing medicine without a license, and he was sentenced to 26 months in prison. He served about 18 months. In France, along the border of Germany, is the city of Mulhouse. Early on the morning of October 17, 2009, the police in Mulhouse got a phone call. On the street, someone had found broken glasses, shoes, and blood. The police went to the area and chained to a fence outside the prosecutor's office, they found 74-year-old Dieter Kronbach. He was bleeding because he had suffered a blow to the head that caused a skull fracture. Around the time that he was found, Andre Bamberski, who was in Mulhouse, called the police. He told them that the man chained to the fence was Dieter Kronbach, a wanted fugitive. Kronbach was taken to the hospital and then he was placed under arrest. Andre was also arrested. The police searched his hotel room and they found 19,000 euros in his safe. Close to Kronbach, the police found a phone bill belonging to a man named Anton Krasniqi. Andre was questioned by the police and he was asked if he knew Krasniqi. The police suspected that Andre hired him to kidnap Kronbach and smuggle him into France. The 19,000 euros was the payment. Andre denied knowing Krasniqi. Andre was released on bond after 2 days of questioning. Krasniqi and another man, Kasha Bavoloni, were also arrested for the kidnapping. The German government demanded the release of Kronbach. They argued that the statute of limitations on his conviction from his trial in absentia had ended. The French government said no, and they reinstated the charges against Kronbach. Dieter Kronbach went to trial in October 2011, over 29 years after Kalinka Bamberski died. The defense argued that the trial shouldn't happen because Kronbach had been illegally brought into the country. They also pointed out that he was the victim of a kidnapping and an assault. Those arguments were noted but overruled. Several experts who examined Kalinka's tissue samples testified, and they said she had asphyxiated to death. Other experts said that the labia had been torn before death, which led to the bleeding. They also surmised that the white substance was most likely semen. 3 women testified that Kronbach had drugged and raped them. The jury deliberated for several hours. They found Dieter Kronbach guilty of voluntary violence leading to an unintentional death with aggravated circumstances. The conviction carried a maximum sentence of 30 years of prison. 76-year-old Dieter Kronbach was sentenced to 15 years of prison. Andre Bamberski went to trial for kidnapping in May 2014. Andre admitted to consenting to the kidnapping of Kronbach, but he claimed he was not involved in the actual kidnapping. He was found guilty of kidnapping and given a 1-year suspended sentence. The men who committed the actual kidnapping, Anton Krasniqi and Kasha Bavoloni, were also convicted and sentenced to a year in prison. For Andre, it was worth it. His nearly 30-year crusade for justice was finally finished. Dieter Kronbach was released in February 2020 after serving nearly 9 years of prison. He was released for medical reasons. He returned to Germany to live with his daughter. Many people believe that Kalinka Bamberski is not the only person Dieter Kronbach killed. In 1969, Kronbach was married to his first wife, 24-year-old Monika Hensa. Seemingly out of nowhere, Hensa fell seriously ill. She became blind, mute, and then paralyzed. Hensa was taken to the hospital. According to Hensa's mother, Kronbach pushed the doctor who was attending to her aside and then injected her with something he called snake venom. 24-year-old Maria Hensa died a short time later. Kronbach was never criminally investigated for the death of his first wife. At the time of this video, Dieter Krombach is 86 years old. While he may not have served as much time in prison as 83-year-old Andrei Bambersky would have liked, his reputation has been destroyed. Instead of being remembered as a respected doctor, he'll be remembered as a notorious serial rapist and killer. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our podcast, Into the Killing. In our latest episode, we talk about the 1984 murder of 14-year-old Tina Fales. The police had a surprising amount of suspects, but the identity of the killer surprised them when he was arrested over 3 decades later. You can find Into the Killing on Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.